Now it started recording. Does anyone in particular want to kick off the meeting? Lisa, do you want to just talk about, representing the Board of Selectmen and the charge that the selectmen already approved?
Do I have to read the,
No.
no? Are you sure?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking the charge. Yes, you do
Yeah.
have to read.
Okay,
the
so do
statement.
I have to read the whole paragraph?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
okay.
Sorry. Yes.
All right, calling to order the meeting of the Capital Planning Committee Wednesday, April 1st, 2:05. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order superseding certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, GL, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Southborough Capital Planning Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting may be found on Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. Okay. So, I'm sure that everybody's reviewed the charge of what the purpose of the meeting is. I can briefly just touch on it for those that may be watching at home. The primary charge of the Capital Planning Committee is as follows: work with town finance team to maintain town's capital plan. This will be achieved by regular meetings and discussions with town departments, boards, and committees that will forward requests for capital funding as part of the annual or special town meeting. While this committee will have no oversight of the annual operating budget, they need to be aware and receive regular updates of the operating budgets to ensure that capital needs are considered in an appropriate order and timing. Second, in the immediate term, perform a comprehensive assessment of all town-owned facilities and property, including school properties. Work collaboratively with other town boards and committees to provide a plan for construction, remodeling, consolidation, or sale. Provide initial report on or before September 1st, 2020 to the Board of Selectmen and Advisory Committee. In the absence of a formal building committee for a specific project, this committee will serve as point of initial approval for all project expenses, change orders, and invoices. Projects falling under the oversight of this committee will specifically be decided as part of or immediately following any town meeting appropriation by a vote of the Board of Selectmen based on a recommendation from the town administrator. And if the Board of Selectmen decide to have a separate building committee for any specific project, then a member of this committee shall be appointed. So that is the charge. Before we go any further, we can do the organization of the committee. Does anyone have a recommendation for chair?
Hey, Lisa, can we do introductions just maybe for everyone to understand? Because I think that would probably be important.
Yes, I was going to do that, but I was going to wait till the chair. I figured that was a good start for the chair, but that's okay. So if everybody wants to take a second and let the public and everyone else in the room know who's here and who you are.
So why don't we go from left to right?
I don't know if everybody has the same left to right. I found that out at the selectmen's meeting. It's different. So, Mr. Palmer, why don't you start?
My name is Joe Palmer. I live 158 Parkville Road. I've lived in town about 5 years, and I thought this getting involved in certainly this area would be a great place to start, given the tax burden upon the town and all the upheaval we've had lately.
Perfect. Mr. Malinowski.
So Jason Malinowski, have lived in town since 2013. In my day job, I work as CPA, a partner with PwC, primarily in the tax line of service, and also am a per diem lieutenant with the Boxborough Fire Department. So do have a decent amount of background in the fire service as well. My prior municipal experiences, I was the chair of the Public Safety Study Committee in the Fire Chief Screening Committee over the past couple of years, and currently serve as the chair of the Public Safety Building Committee, which is hopefully not going to be around too much longer.
Mr. Pfaff.
Hi, Andrew Pfaff. I lived here most recently for the last 3 years, but previously spent 20 years here growing up and left for a little period of time. Came home. I'm an executive director over at Santander Bank. I oversee transformation and technology for the corporate investment banking division. I'm also on the advisory committee, but I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Kathy?
So I'm Kathy Cook. So am I supposed to do something to make sure you see me?
We
you,
can see you.
We can see you.
okay, and hear me too?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm Kathy Cook. So I'm the current chair of the advisory committee. I've been on advisory for many years. I actually used to chair the predecessor to this committee. So we had a capital budget committee until, I forget the year that we expanded, but we did have one for a long time. So I was on that one. I am a tax CPA by background, and have lived here since 1989.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Hark.
Hi, Jeff Hark. I've lived in Southborough for about 7 years. During the day, I'm a CPA and work for a finance and accounting consulting firm, and wanted to try and help out the town and contribute with my skill set. So nice to meet you all.
Wonderful. Thank you. We have ex officio, Mr. Ballantyne.
Hi, my name is Brian Valentine. I'm the finance director, treasurer for the town of Southborough for probably the past 17, 18 years, and looking forward to helping the committee.
All right. Vanessa?
Vanessa Hale, I'm the assistant town administrator here. I've been with the town for just shy of 20 years. My primary role is to support the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator. I spend probably about 60 to 70% of my time on human resource operations for the town, but the rest is spent on sort of government or community relations, including supporting all our boards and committees.
Wonderful. Lisa Braccio, member of the Board of Selectmen. I have been on various committees, too many to mention, over the last 15 years. So I'm excited to be on this. I'm excited with the people that have stepped forward. And Kathy, I think you have serving on this before will have a big impact on guiding us forward as well. So that being said, thank you, everybody. And back to organization of the committee. Is there anyone that would like to step forward to be chair, or would someone like to nominate someone to be chair?
I would like to nominate Jason Malinowski.
Go ahead, Kathy, sorry.
And just to explain why. So I've worked with Jason on the public building safety committee for the last, I don't know, Jason, what, 2 years or so? Jason's been on that
Longer
project.
than that.
Okay, well, time flies, right? Anyway, he's about to roll off that committee, so I think he's got probably time to do this one. But he's just done such a great job on that committee that I would love to work on a committee that he's chair of again.
Wonderful. Those that have not served on a committee, so typically the format now is I'll ask for a second, then we'll open it up for discussion, and if there's no discussion, we'll take a physical vote. So do I have a second for that nomination?
I'll second that.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Pfaff, and any discussion, any comments? Okay, that being said, based on the motion, all in favor? Braccio, aye. You have to say your name and aye.
Oh,
sorry.
roll call. Yes, thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Cook, aye.
Pfaff, aye.
Hark, aye.
Palmer, aye.
Wonderful. And
Yeah, I'm gonna
Jason
abstain.
will abstain. Okay, so we now have a chair. And Kathy, in the past on this committee, typically, did you have a vice chair in the past? I know some committees do, some committees don't.
No, we didn't. We had just the person who gets to take the minutes.
All right, that's the next best thing. Do we have anyone that would be interested in being the secretary?
Everybody raise their hand at once.
I know.
So it's a tough job to be the clerk of any committee. We have to have someone in title in the position. It doesn't mean that this committee can't chip in and share the
Okay.
role. It's ultimately the responsibility of the clerk to make sure the minutes get done in a timely manner and get to the town clerk's office. We can go through all the rules, but just if you volunteer for this we can talk about whether there's others that may help in and chip in, especially in this video setting. And given that everything's recorded, I think the setting's actually easier to take minutes because it allows you to go back after a meeting. So I don't know if that sold anyone on stepping forward, but
We don't have a budget either, so we can't, you know, some groups and committees have a paid minute taker. We don't have a budget, so unless that changes, there's no one to hire.
Actually, Jason, I should have turned it over to you.
I was gonna let you close out the agenda item, but if you want me
Okay.
to run with it from here.
You could run with it.
Happy to.
I'm happy to turn it over to you.
All right, so is anyone gonna volunteer? Am I gonna have to pick out of a hat and make a nomination myself?
Well, let me just say this, Andrew Pfaff is already Secretary of Advisory, so I don't think it's fair to ask him to be Secretary twice.
All right,
Agreed.
so,
I can do, I'll do it.
all right, so I will motion that we nominate Jeff Hark as the clerk of the committee. Is there a second?
Second,
Any discussion? Roll call vote, Malinowski, aye.
Cook,
Brashio,
aye.
aye.
Palmer, aye.
Bath,
And-
aye.
Jeff, are you abstaining or voting?
Abstain, yeah.
All right. You got that, Vanessa?
And Jeff,
All right.
I don't need switching off. I don't mind switching off and helping.
That's
I
fine,
don't
we can
either.
figure it out.
I will help you too, Jeff, so.
We can figure it out, not a big deal.
Yeah, we'll all work it out together.
And you'll see the format that Vanessa, Jeff, I can probably share.
Yeah.
You'll see the format Vanessa does her notes in. I'm sure we can share maybe Kathy some representation from advisory, and then Public Safety Building Committee, I think is a pretty good example too. It's more of a transcript than an actual meeting notes, so we can kind of walk you through the process.
Sure.
There. So, going back to vice chair, I think it's important to have a vice chair. I'm not necessarily sold on past precedent because I think it's important to have just to know, like, if I'm unavailable to chair a meeting, who will step in and run the meeting. So I don't necessarily have a specific person here, but I think it is important just to have another person that would be our point of contact if either I'm remote or unable to join a meeting to run the meeting, in my absence.
I agree with you. Lisa said to me, did you have one before? So I just answered the question. I didn't say whether I thought we should have one
Yeah.
or not. And I agree with you. I think you should because of the need to.
I don't know if
have
anyone
fill-in.
wants to step forward and would be comfortable running a meeting as vice chair.
I'll do it.
Is there anyone else that wants to be considered?
Can I nominate Kathy?
I would
So
do
we-
it.
I'm sorry?
I
All right,
would do it.
so Joe, is yours an official nomination or just you're stepping forward as a volunteer? Then I'll come to what Lisa just said.
I'm just volunteering. If nobody else would like the position, I'm perfectly comfortable doing it.
Okay, and Lisa, you're making an official nomination of Kathy.
Yeah, and I was nominating Kathy only because Kathy's run the meetings and she's well aware of the open meeting law requirements and, she's chair of advisory. So I nothing against you, Mr. Palmer. I
I have
just,
nothing against it either.
yeah, I get nervous with open meeting law and,
That sounds good. Let's just go with it.
so that was my reason for doing that. I just was looking for someone with experience in running a meeting with municipal guidelines.
Those are great reasons. Let's go with it.
All right, so we have a nomination, need a second.
Second,
Second,
All right, seconded by Mr. Hark. Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote, Malinowski, aye.
Palmer, aye.
Hark, aye.
Bath, aye.
Brashio, aye.
And
Cook
Kathy, you.
abstains. I'll abstain.
All right, perfect. We are organized, thank you. And just for the new members, obviously our term is only through 6:30. The Board of Selectmen typically revisit this in June. And we'll ask whether we want to continue. So hopefully everyone has a good few months and is willing to continue. And we still do have an open seat on the committee as well. So we're going to be required to have 4 out of the 6 of us at any meeting going forward, given that Mark and Brian do not count towards the quorum requirement. So, as we go forward, I think when, we get past that 6:30 date, it would be my intention, because I would, be as chair, I would also put a reorganization of the committee. Doesn't mean we have to reorganize, but I think it's a good practice just to revisit if anyone feels willing to step forward, et cetera. With that, I think in terms of next steps, I just wanted to kind of get the pulse of the committee of where we want to go, what the availability is of everyone, given kind of the unique setting that we're in, to push forward. Because as Lisa mentioned during the opening, we have a date in our charge of when we're supposed to provide a report. It includes a summer that hopefully we can all get to enjoy and not be kind of sheltered up. But I think we do have a unique opportunity here with most departments where some aren't business as normal, to really get their attention and focus on their capital needs and understand it, versus others we're going to have to be a little more cognizant of where they're at. So what I thought I would do is lay out what I think our plan should be, and then welcome maybe some commentary from the group of detours you may want to take along the way and other ideas that you have, if that would work. All right, I'm seeing head nods. So what I was thinking is getting a copy of the capital plan from Mark and Brian. My understanding is there is one available. They've asked for refinements from a few departments. And Brian, do you know when that would be available to us?
Yeah, we should, it's mostly done, but unfortunately has two pieces to go, the DPW and facilities, which of course are primary departments for that. So I've asked for it by Friday, and it'll probably take me a day or two just to look it over, massage it, and get it back to form where I can send it out to you.
So is there any reason you couldn't send us all departments other than facilities and DPW today?
I could, yes, with the caveat knowing that it's a little incomplete.
So I would just err on the side of getting us whatever you have with whatever caveats. And I think this committee certainly is open to the fact that that would be open. So, my suggestion would be that, we then go through that capital plan with each department. And some departments may not only be a department head, but it may be a board or a commission that supports it, and really understand what their needs are. And also, I think there's a couple of things, right? Is, what are their needs? What are the timing of their needs? And what needs maybe aren't fully captured? Did something fall off the radar along the way? Just to kind of give everyone an opportunity to put all their wants, requests on the table without kind of thinking about the finances around it. Just say, this is the reason why I would need it. So then we can kind of come together as a group to create what I think is what I'd call the comprehensive plan that we'll have to report back on. I think we all know when we do a first blush at this, it's going to be probably astronomical where some of the requests are and where they land. And I think it's upon us to try to slot those needs. I think, Kathy and Lisa can probably speak best to this, of how the public safety building came together, right? That wasn't just police and fire needs. You ended up having 10 to 15 committees that ultimately had to collaborate there to bring it to fruition. So I think the more we do is this committee to bring those groups together and kind of connect the pieces of the puzzle, as opposed to, right, just I'll pick on Karen and John that haven't submitted their budgets yet, or their capital yet, right? If they're working in a silo and not connecting the dots of, if you do this project in year 1 and this project in year 2, you may be able to save if you bundle it together. I think that's my expectation of where we would go. If we have the capital plan, then what I can do is reach out to each of the department heads and start to schedule them out. But obviously I'm going to need guidance from this group of how often you want to meet, when you want to meet, and how long you can meet for during, especially if we take the daytime setting, given this unique environment. So that was kind of my general plan of what we would accomplish over the next month or so, is just have every department head in, maybe not the fire chief. I'll kind of leave it up to him. But I think everyone other than that, I think, Brian and Mark will be cognizant of whatever you get pulled into along the way. But that was my view of where we should go. But I'm open to other thoughts of how best to do this.
Jason, why are you going to leave out the fire chief?
I think with his role as emergency management, I don't think we want to distract him. I mean, I'll call Chief Achilles and just say, but I'm going to offer that he be the absolute last person we talk to. I'm fairly certain I could speak to a lot of that. If we needed to start to understand, I could speak to timing of apparatus replacements. Obviously, they're not going to have a facility to replace in our purview. So, I think I could provide a guide. I've had a lot of conversations with him just in the year since we selected him essentially as our chief in collaboration with the board. So I would just give him that option, given the calls he has to participate on with NEMA, FEMA, and everyone else in between.
That is true, although this would be a good time for him to touch base with us to let us know what the capital differences are going to be moving forward, given the different circumstances that he's encountering. So at least sometime in our process between now and September would be a really good time to.
Oh, it's not going to be, I mean, I'm just trying to give him a little bit more leeway.
I know, I understand that. I'm just throwing the log on.
Oh yeah, he is going to be integral to the process. It's just a matter of whether it's in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
So Jason, to me, and Lisa, one of the big wild cards here is, are we going to focus on everything but buildings initially, and then add buildings to our list at some point? That piece of it is a long-term piece. Would involve the school committee. It's not our decision, what to do with schools. They'd have to basically kind of lead the charge there. Some of the things that we're going to look at, I think, need buildings to be part of the decision. So I'm not sure what the best way to do this is, but I do think at some point we got to look at buildings too. For example, the senior center, what they want to do.
I think it's part of the same conversation, right? So
Yeah.
I think, and that's when, so John Perrin, for example, when he comes for facilities, should be speaking to senior center needs. I would assume library, when they come, will be speaking to building needs. And then I think we need to figure out, given the school conversation and just, for the sake of the obvious and throwing it out there, do we consolidate schools is going to be a primary item that this committee is going to have to tackle in collaboration with the school committee, and, come back with some sort of recommendation, because I think that anchor point will answer a lot of the other questions, right? If you have a school shutting, which school is it, and what building, can that building be repurposed, or is it, going to be open for a bulldozer, right? And I think we all.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Can we request from facilities a list, just so that everybody, I'm aware of the buildings, but Andrew or Mr. Hark or Mr. Palmer may not be aware of all of the components that make up the town buildings. For facilities, can we at least work on getting a list from this meeting today, so we all have a comprehensive idea of, what we're going to be assessing, what buildings they are? I just think that would be beneficial.
Yeah, that was one of my questions is, what is the town staff ability to provide some data? I mean, I kind of started to put together a list of kind of data elements from that we could help,
So Andrew, why don't you run through that list? Sorry to interrupt you, but why don't you just run through that list, and I'm just going to capture it, and we'll figure out who to request it from, and then people can pile on to it.
And I can send you kind of my list, but what do we have that the town owns from a raw buildable land perspective? I think we just need probably the property record cards there from the assessor's office. Buildings owned by the town, so again, the different pieces that we have in the puzzle that we can use. Obviously, the departments will come back and give us their opinions, but they might not even know that some of this land is available or certain things. And we should also know whether or not there's any restrictions on it, easements that you couldn't do certain things with it. Do we rent or have any facilities rented by the town in the town? I'm not sure if that's the case, but if we do, any property leases on that. Vehicles owned by the town, and if we have it, what's the mileage, what's the annual usage, date and service, things of that nature, so we can kind of forecast. I know we had some issues on advisory with take-home vehicles and and forecasting that in the capital plan. So if we have a current inventory, we can start to forecast that out a bit. And the same with like equipment that's probably over $25,000 or $50,000, different things that DPW has, or just kind of fixed assets that we own. Just making sure we understand what we have, how many hours are being put on it, what we feel like the end rate on that is, so we can forecast some of that stuff out. Even some of the generators that are pretty expensive might fall into that. And for any of the equipment, whether or not we have any remaining bond payments on that, that we might want to look to refinance or something like that. And then we have the capital plan for sure. And then there's probably going to be some forecasted data elements that we could use, especially when we get into the schools, like future pupils, town population growth, things of that nature that might help infer our decisions. So there's just kind of some data elements that we need to pull together to kind of get a good forecast.
So I can start by providing the statement of values list, which has all our properties, our square footage, sort of the category of all our town buildings. John Parent may want to supplement some additional information to that based on, issues within each building, as well as our fleet list would give you the list of all our vehicles, what year they are, what make they are, and so forth.
Okay.
Then I think Andrew, Brian's got the debt schedule that is very detailed and shows exactly, what the debt is for, what the amortization schedule is. So that would be helpful. And then the study that was done in 2011, as far as whether we could go from 43 schools, it's a very detailed study. A lot of work went into it. So I think that's probably the starting point there. It needs to be updated. But there's a lot of good information in that report that was put together back then to try to give us at least the ability to make the decision.
Jason, can I ask, do you envision this committee actually looking at equipment? I mean, I was kind of looking over the charge again, and the charge focuses on town facilities and town property. Do you envision going that step further to actually look at equipment? And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
So my view is we got to take an 80-20 approach. I think the intent when this kind of concept came back to fruition over the last couple of months, and when I was at least asked, what my opinion was, is I think we have a lot of facility and land type issues that are going to take a lot of time, right? So we may not be able to focus on what year the chief replaces his jaws of life on an engine, for example, right? We just have to at some point, and the reason for, especially those that are newer to the committee and in town government, is, ultimately chiefs have to make operational decisions, or department heads have to make operational decisions. And there are some things we're just going to have to leave in their hands and trust that, Lisa and her fellow board members are hiring the right people to make some of those decisions. And ultimately, we all, as taxpayers, will have the option at a meeting to stand up if, an item is in the capital, because right, you list out every single thing in certain articles, to stand up and raise objections. But my thought was the way to address it, Lisa, without making arbitrary decisions is, Brian is going to provide us with a capital plan for each department or committee or what have you. Have that committee come in and outline kind of what their biggest needs are. And then, there may be some things that's just like, the police chief says I need new pistols every X number of years. Probably not something I can foresee us going down a rabbit hole on, but I could foresee a conversation of, Chief, you have X number of vehicles. How are you using your vehicles? Should we be leasing versus owning? Some of them, depending on the wear and the tear. I could see more theoretical arguments about that and debate around that. Again, like a fire truck is like a $600,000 asset, right? So I don't want to pigeonhole ourselves into one thing or another, but I think at least while I'm sitting here as chair, where I'm going to try to direct the conversation is towards the macro topics, because I think that's where we can basically make the biggest impact. And trust, candidly, we have 2 members of advisory here. Like if there's something smaller that just doesn't make sense, like I think, right, and Lisa, you're seeing on the Board of Selectmen, you bring in and say, hey, can capital committee weigh in, as opposed to us diving headfirst into the deep end of the pool and then having to backtrack and kind of never getting to the big picture topics of, right, closing a school, keeping all the schools open, how do you deal with the senior center, how do you deal with the library, how do you deal with the townhouse? Those are much bigger conversations that we need to deal with.
South Union. So Jason, I agree. There's been work done in the past for things like police cars. I think we've got that part done. We know he's going to put 100,000 miles on the cars. We know what his rotation is. So I don't know we've got to recreate that one. But what you said a second ago, I think is important. As far what I think we've got the ability to do in our charge is to not only recommend a capital plan, but also talk about how to buy it. Andrew Pfaff has brought a lot of good knowledge to advisory recently as far as different ways to even buy a fire truck. Apparently Santander takes advantage of a tax credit you get if you lease to municipalities fire trucks. So I want to look, I hope we can look at how to do it too, not just what to do, but how to do it to see if there's some way to reduce the total cost over time as far as that goes, not just, float bonds and we're done.
I think that's definitely something we can analyze as we go through these. And I think as those ideas percolate, I think that's where we need Brian and Mark as our ex officio members to say, we've already looked at this, here's the data, why, or say, good idea, I need some help thinking through it some more.
And one other thing,
Usually
Jason,
some of those conversations are good idea, but by state law, government can't do that or this or that.
That's why I think you,
specifically.
yeah, but no, that's why we need you to weigh in before we go down certain rabbit holes
Right.
that just may not be plausible, even though it may be plausible in our personal or professional lives.
Right.
also, Jason, when we get to the town land portion, the town owns a variety of different parcels of land. Some of it has a conservation restriction. Some of it is under the care and control of the Conservation Commission without a conservation restriction. And some of it is, some are smaller parcels that the town has taken through tax taking, leftover pieces on developments and whatnot. So I think it's going to be really important that we know when we get a list of parcels that not every parcel is something that's even viable to potentially look at down the road as for doing something with. And I'm fairly familiar with most of those parcels. So I would be happy to, when we get to that point on the land, help.
So
'Cause I know Shopsy's looked at the list as well, and different committees that I'm on as well have looked at it for a need.
well, and I think public safety had to look at it because we were
Yeah.
we didn't have the golf course in our sites originally.
Exactly.
So, and I know, for those who don't know, Mr. Hamilton, who was the original chair of public safety, did a lot of research
A lot.
on that. So maybe, Lisa, I'll dig up the records I have on that, and maybe if we could task you with just, once the list comes out, maybe instead of Brian or Vanessa sending us a blanket list, maybe saying, these are your 5 potential developed parcels, or 3 or 1, just so we understand before we go down some side track that is not warranted.
Yep. And there's additions to that list as well. I know since I've been on the board, Brian, when I got on, you guys gave me, I think there was 5 additions through tax taking that
Yes.
as well. So,
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So Jason, it might help to explain to the 2 newest people, Mr. Palmer, Mr. Hark, kind of why we are where we are at this point. So we formed this committee, or we asked for this committee to be formed because we know we've got a big budget problem in the next few years, big one. And it looked like it was in large part because of capital expenses that were on our capital plan. We tend to defer a lot in Southborough. So our original plan had been to have the normal town meeting in March 28th, and then have a special town meeting in the fall that would give us time to take a look at the capital piece. So we had asked to have most of the capital that we would normally have seen on the annual town meeting deferred to the fall, which everybody agreed with. That was what's going to happen. Now, of course, all plans are off, or all bets are off because of what's happened. So I'm not sure how those meetings are going to come together, whether we'll still have 2 being you know, it sounds like maybe one's in June, one's September, they're so close. So that will all have to get worked out too. But that's kind of where we are as far as the initial plan that has now been thrown aside.
So Brian and Vanessa, let's just play out a potential scenario. If the town meeting gets moved to June,
You can plan on it. I mean, right
right,
now,
right, like you can't do anything before May 4th, right?
and even beyond that, because the Senate is voting this week on legislation that they've been trying to hammer out with the House that will go to the governor to be signed relative to moving town meeting. Right now, the law says you can only move it by 30 days. So the governor needs to hammer out how communities can extend their town meetings out much further. We've already postponed once to April 16th. Obviously, based on his order yesterday, you know, that's off. You know, the moderator has not yet selected a new date. I think he'll hopefully be coming virtually to meet with the selectmen next Tuesday to talk about additional dates. So, I mean, in my opinion, it's at least June, because our boards and committees, even though the warrant is posted, you know, many of our boards and committees still need to meet to hammer out their presentations and, you know, what's changed over the past
Can
few
the
months for
warrant
them.
change or no?
The
this
money, the ceiling can't change, and the articles still have to be within the four corners of the articles, but you can't add an article at this point.
So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, if, given that we were originally put together to vet the items that were postponed till September, if
Mhm.
this committee actually vetted those before June, which is not a tremendous lift, was postponed based on what, at least what I'm aware of, can those be moved forward at all, or are we stuck with that decision? I see Brian shaking his head no.
Yeah, you're stuck. You're stuck. Yeah. You're stuck.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we could amend, Brian, we could amend the article on the floor.
Well, I don't think it's these ones that are the fall. They're not even in the warrant, right?
Right.
They're not even in the.
But Jason's right, there's not a lot that got postponed. You know, the bigger things actually stayed on it, the fire truck, the fin boiler, et cetera.
I was just looking to see if we, given how close it's gotten, right? It made a lot of sense.
Right.
March and September.
Good idea. Good idea, but yeah.
So I guess if you so our focus has got to be on still vetting those sooner rather than later and understanding what each of those are, especially probably the non-advisory and non-BOS members on this committee that haven't seen presentations or anything on those yet. But
And
we should still expect that to be in September. But candidly, we will have an opportunity to bring forward other items that may be pertinent or move those things around depending upon the findings of the committee. Like, let's just say one of those items we don't think is even warranted, and we make a recommendation and BOS and advisory buy in on that. But we say there is something that's far more important that was 2 years down the road, but because of facts and circumstances, makes a lot of sense to do now. We will have that liberty to at least make a recommendation.
Right.
No one can listen, but at least we'll have the ability to bring.
Right. And the other thing is, just to sort of keep in mind, I mean, we have to get our boards and committees, you know, back to business, you know, sooner rather than later. But, you know, as of right now, you know, the selectmen's, and Lisa can speak to this, you know, guidance is, you know, the only boards and committees that should be meeting are those related to COVID or time sensitive matters. Now, you know, we all know that can't go on forever. You know, but right now our public buildings aren't open to anybody. You know, our staff is working remotely. I think, you know, to your point earlier, Jason, part of it is this is a good time to get them to focus on some strategic planning and some analysis. But it's, you know, it's not exactly business as usual.
Yeah.
Vanessa, you didn't actually print the warrant, did you?
Yes, it is. It's
It's all
here.
printed?
Yeah. We missed this by a week.
Right. It's close.
And I might add too, at the Board of Selectmen meeting last night, we tested out Zoom with public participation. It worked really well. It was really
It was
easy.
smooth.
Yeah, it was really great. So I would anticipate a discussion within the next couple of weeks from the board, possibly opening it up, my opinion, to opening it up to some boards and committees to actually be able to meet.
So I guess what is there any other ideas other than starting to schedule in some of these department heads into our meetings and these boards and commissions into our meetings that anyone wanted to try to explore or understand once we get the data from Brian?
Can we go back for 1 second to what Kathy was talking about when she said, for us new people, understanding the capital issues that were upcoming as to why this committee was formed? I didn't get, I understood what you were saying, but the non-specifics left me a little wondering.
So I think when you look at where the town's levy capacity is, and I think it probably would be important just for everyone to understand what levy capacity means. And we can, Brian, it might be helpful to have you walk through that schedule at our next meeting, just like on what it looks like, what the 5-year plan you presented to the BOS is I think the general intent of the town is to avoid a Proposition 2.5 override, right? And that intent existed prior to the economic uncertainty that we're all faced with right now. So when the town was looking 5 years out at just kind of continuing budgets at I'll call it a status, just general inflation, and then looked at kind of what the way the capital plan was looking and what the needs of the town were going to be as compared to the revenue growth that was existing in town, which there wasn't much growth. There was an issue where we were going to be at a point where we would actually have to go to the polls to vote on the budget unless either services were cut or capital needs were pushed down the road. And I think the nice thing is we have most of the school debt that was for all the schools that were built about 20 years ago is now coming off the books. Public safety is now on the books. Granted, it came in on the books a little selfishly here, but Brian and his team, right, got this thing a lot lower than what it was supposed to be in terms of the financing around it, the rates around it, et cetera. And obviously the cost was $3 million less than what it was supposed to be.
And you had the golf on top of it.
Yeah, and that's including the golf course. Came in $3 million under all of that. So I think just where the numbers were hashing out is it didn't make sense. And as someone that kind of started the conversation here in town about reinvigorating it and trying to recruit people, because my understanding is the reason this capital committee went away in the past was people just weren't volunteering, was that I saw what I would call a siloed approach, right? So department head brings something forward, Brian and Mark vet it, they're doing their best to try to deal with all the needs of a certain town, but there was no one group trying to put it all together. And that, in my opinion, is not Mark and Brian's job, right? Because I think it's, our job to kind of think through how do you bring these pieces together and build, a better puzzle as opposed to just the puzzles that each of these kind of silos want. And I think when you look at, I think we have, deteriorating conditions in the library, deteriorating conditions at the senior center, deteriorating conditions at the townhouse, and some obsolete buildings. Now, granted, we've gotten rid of a lot of obsolete buildings too in the last couple of years. Bringing that all together into a comprehensive plan that makes sense, as opposed to just everyone for themselves, was kind of what was the genesis behind all of this.
Along the lines you're talking about, as well as the building, the buildings and the assets. I don't think that we should exclude ventures into operational data to figure out. I mean, I've heard some stories about the way that some of the project plans were done in the past. And
so that's a good point. That's the oversight arm of this, and we'll come to that. I want to talk about the plan first. I'll come right back to you on oversight in a second.
Sure.
Do you have anything else on the actual plan of like forecasting and coming up with a comprehensive plan?
At the moment where I am is I think I need to see a lot more in terms of material to understand any change in methodology that I would advise.
No, that's fair. I mean, in this meeting is meant to be, I think, more organizational than anything else.
Okay. I was just adding that as to the scope, because I know Lisa had already brought up the scope.
Yeah.
No,
that was my intent to go there next.
All right, thank you.
Anything else with the plan? So does anyone have any objections to me starting to reach out to schedule these meetings? And we can talk about the schedule momentarily here.
No.
Jason, the only thing I'm not sure that we have in the capital plan that might be worth looking at is, I don't think we really have anything in there from an affordable housing perspective. I think we have some set aside CPA funds for that. So I think as we start to meet with these different groups and committees, maybe keeping that in mind for some of the reuse of our property, or kind of having something in mind of having some more affordable housing.
That's a
Yeah.
great point, Andrew. I'm on Shopsy, so I appreciate that.
It is. I just don't know that we're going to have the bandwidth to do that. It is a great idea, but we've got a lot on our plate. There's a lot to look at.
Yeah,
In-
yeah.
in-
I think
in
if we
my-
know what the CPA funds are available, as we look at different properties available or things like that, we can, try to come up with ideas that might not be presenting to us from the different boards and committees. I think that's just something the town needs to do.
In my goal is to cast a wide net here, right up front, and let everyone bring their, I'll call it wish list forward. And then that's where we're going to have to really narrow down, and it's not going to be an easy job, right? But where we focus and where we don't, and where we say, these are the other avenues you need to explore. All right, so in terms of meeting planning, and then we'll go to the oversight portion. I don't hear any objections to this committee continuing to meet, Lisa, right? Given the timeline that we're under, is there any directive from the board of selectmen that we need to kind of wait a little bit, or are we able to kind of schedule amongst ourselves now?
Vanessa, you might want to jump in on that one. I
think, it's meant to be limited meetings right now. Some of your work obviously is things you want to gear in on right away. And I don't think this committee should be meeting every week because, we're trying to allow some of the, the Zoom stuff for our permitting boards to get back to work, for permits that need to be dealt with, public hearings that have been postponed. So there's some limited capacity. But I think the committee needs to get to work, but I would recommend not every week.
yeah, at least
What,
to start,
Vanessa,
Jason,
what did you say? Not every what?
Not every week.
because there are a lot of boards and committees that the board unanimously has been very strong in either COVID-19 or essential. I think a lot of the stuff initially for this committee, in my opinion, might be to be the gathering of some of the information, so everybody has some of this information. And I think that's going to take a little bit of time. I'm hoping, Jason, within a week or two, the board relaxes a little bit now that we do have capabilities for public participation, because that was such an important part of why we decided to hold off on anything. So maybe during this next week, we could take a look at gathering the information, on some of the properties and whatnot, and getting it into everybody's hands. And I can talk to Brian Shea and bring up at our next meeting next Tuesday, if how we want to relax. But I agree, Vanessa, the board was fairly unanimous on.
Very conservative on this.
Yeah, because once you start allowing one group, you've got to allow other groups. But I think this initial meeting was important to have done. And I think you've got a roadmap, and if we could get some of this information regarding the land, the facilities and whatnot, for going forward for our next meeting, then I think
We've also made sure, thanks to Tom, who I think is still there in the background, that, many of our managers have access to our virtual network. So, there should not be an issue of people having to come back to the building to collect information. People do have access to their network, especially with what the governor is saying about we're going into such a major peak with this disease right now. We're trying really hard to keep people out of the buildings and keep them at home. But that piece has gone very well, that people have access to the network to get to their files.
And Jason, I'll bring this up at our meeting next Tuesday, only because I don't want to speak fully for the board on this.
Well, would it be helpful, Lisa, for me to, depending, I guess where my concern is we have a debt, unless the board is planning to adjust, we're already 2 months behind, in my opinion.
And I understand we're on a
So-
September 1st timeframe, and I understand that. And I'm happy to relay it to the board, Jason, or if you would like to do it, either way, I am more than happy to bring it up with the board and just get consensus from the board, because the last thing I want is someone to say, we're allowing one group to meet when somebody else may deem their business just as important. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm happy to submit a letter on behalf of the committee if the committee thinks we need to get going, or if everyone's just wants to relax and wait a couple of weeks while we just gather the data. I'm happy, if that's the consensus of the committee, I'm happy to follow that lead. But I also think we're going to be petitioning the board for an extension if we don't get going, which if that's what it is, no one expected this. So I just think we need to kind of, before we lose another month, call the ball on timing.
Well, I would
Hey.
hope we wouldn't lose another month. You know? Again, I'll defer to, I'm only one person on this group. I think it's important that we meet. But
I agree.
I think
I would want to
once
meet
we-
as much as we
yeah.
can.
Yeah, I think as soon as we get the data, I think we need at least a week to digest it and do an analysis and then meet again. So I think it really depends on when we start getting some data back. But I think meeting in 2 or 3 weeks is certainly something we should look to do. And if we need to ask the board for special permission for that, or hopefully it frees up a little bit with the new Zoom public participation, that we can do that.
So Lisa, what I would propose we do, I think we need the consent of the board, is that based on what I'm hearing here, that I'll type a letter to Brian, I'll CC you on it if you'd like, just saying that at this, based on the discussion in the open meeting today, we'd like to start meeting, the week of April 13th. And to please let me know, please discuss in so you're meeting on April 7th.
Yep, next Tuesday.
So please, raise any objections that you have on April 7th. Otherwise, the committee is going to start to meet and coordinate with other town department heads and committees. And obviously, we will be very open and aware to changes depending on department head availability if this takes a turn down a path we don't want it to go down.
Perfect.
Okay. So I will start to grab the data and work with everyone and try to cohesively bring it back together, as opposed to just sending just forwarding stuff randomly. I will just caution everyone, I will likely, there is a committee group email address. So we'll go to all committee members. I will just use the BCC function of that to avoid any inadvertent open meeting law violation. So what we can't be doing is then emailing back and asking questions. We need to bring the questions to this forum and discuss it openly. We shouldn't really be discussing outside of the meeting. It's just usually the general guide that I tend to like to follow because it keeps us free and clear. But just keep in mind that the town email should really be used as a mechanism to receive the data, request meeting agenda items if you don't think I'm capturing them the right way, and to just provide availability, for meetings. It shouldn't be meant for any sort of substantive discussion that could come back to a meeting, even if it's just because Lisa's on my screen right now, me talking to Lisa. It's really meant to be more administrative, in terms of scheduling discussions and receiving the data. Everything will go to the town email. So Tom is incredibly resourceful and helpful. If any of the new members don't have good access to it or haven't been able to figure that out, I just reach out directly to Tom LaFlame to get that access. I guess, assuming we start to meet again on the week of the 13th, is there a time of day that works best? Assuming we know we're going to at least be in this state through the 4th. Morning, midday, evening, and a day of the week to avoid, or do you want to wait and come back to me, or you want me to propose some dates?
With enough notice, I'm
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, we're not going anywhere, so.
Flexible.
Flexible here too.
Can I just get a sense, day or evening, like during the workday or evening? What's the preference?
No preference.
Over the
for
next
me.
month, no preference, but probably evening otherwise.
I would prefer evening if no one else cares, but I could still do either.
What about like first thing, Kathy? Would
First thing
that,
in the morning,
yeah,
I could do that.
okay.
Yeah, me too.
I prefer evening, but
All right, so I got 2 votes for evenings and everyone else seemed pretty indifferent. Is that,
And I'm fine with evening, Jason, if
Okay.
it's
Just
easier
not
for you
Tuesdays.
Yes,
members.
that works.
afternoon evenings are usually better.
all right, so let's plan, and I will confirm Monday evening, the 13th. And let's try to go with Monday as our night, just to create some sort of cadence.
Jason, sorry,
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt. Vanessa, doesn't typically planning board meet on Mondays?
They do.
I don't want to conflict with,
So yeah, if you're thinking about hopefully not too far in the future, meeting in person, it would be difficult to get the meeting room here on Mondays or Tuesdays.
Yeah, but we could do
Public
we could do
safety.
public safety building. That's what we like.
We're a little allegiant to that.
Yes, yes.
so let me just ask if Tom could jump in then, just because I want to make sure that we have the key as the capabilities. We have 2 simultaneous meetings going with public participation, how that would work, seeing as he's been sitting in the meetings.
So you can have 2 meetings going at the same time, but only one would be capable of having public participation. Now, the governor's order, as I understand it, does not require you to have that public comment forum. So if it was a meeting that you didn't need to do that, then I could certainly arrange it. It would require a little bit of juggling, but we can do it.
Okay, thank you.
Let me coordinate with Karina and see when they're planning. Like, they don't meet every Monday either.
No,
But yeah, and I don't know what schedule they'll be on because the following is technically a holiday still, I think.
It is still a legal holiday, so we can't post a meeting.
Yeah, so let me check with Karina and see what planning's planning to do for the 13th, because we could
Okay.
also start earlier and just commit being done by the time they need to start. Otherwise, we'll look at the 15th unless the board isn't meeting on the 14th. So I'll come
We've
back.
been meeting every Tuesday.
Yeah, I would anticipate the board meeting every
Okay.
two.
All right, so let's plan on the 13th and I will come back with an exact time. Otherwise, we'll default to the 15th.
Perfect.
Okay, and then I think for the next meeting, I think we should bring up and discuss the oversight piece. I'd really like to hear from Mark on that piece specifically. I advocated pretty hard when the charge was being drafted to include the oversight, because I think that's 95% of the reason why public safety came in under budget was the oversight, not necessarily the planning up front. That did help, but and I think trying to find a way to collaborate with other boards and committees that are overseeing their own projects or department heads, but also not stepping on anyone's toes, I think is going to be a much broader conversation that I'd like to get Mark to weigh in on in what he has seen work well, because he lived and breathed public safety for the last 3 years with us and saw the merits of that, but also will know how far we can go as an ad hoc committee without, there's obviously political boundaries, but also what our authority can and can't be. And then we can bring back maybe some potential rules of the road in terms of authority and, how we'll improve invoices, how that would appear on a consent agenda for larger projects that get approved here in the future. That makes sense?
Jason, when you send the information that you're going to send, are you going to include the 2011 study that Kathy referenced?
I'll have to get it from Kathy, but yes.
Thank you.
Kathy, you have that?
I do.
All right, perfect. And yeah, and if there is anything that you think is missing, just that isn't, I would assume, an appropriate means to just come back and say, can you try to find this? What I would like to do, just to seem cohesive as a group, is channel our communication, like either through myself or Kathy, just to make sure we don't have 7 of us going to kind of department heads. I think my view of the world is bring them to our meetings as opposed to us having kind of side conversations so that we can all hear it, as opposed to maybe bringing kind of part of the conversation or half of the conversation. So I would just ask that, as we get the stuff, if there is additional data that you want to see, I'm happy to go chase and see if it's available to help make informed decisions, or we'll give kind of homework assignments in each of the meetings to come back and have one of the members present based on their discussions or findings.
Great.
All right, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote. Malinowski, aye.
Palmer, aye.
Mark, aye.
Pfaff, aye.
Okay.
Brashio, aye.
All right, I think we got everyone. Have a good day, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.